You are standing in an empty parking lot, pointing at nothing, telling a room full of investors that this exact spot of cracked asphalt is going to be the most valuable land on Earth. And one of them checks his watch, and you understand, with total clarity, that he thinks you are insane. And the thing is, on this day, with this evidence, in this year, he is being completely reasonable. There is nothing here. There is genuinely, provably nothing here. You are pointing at a use for your product that does not exist yet, that no customer has ever once asked for, that solves a problem the world has not even realized it has. And you are asking these people to fund an entire decade of building a bridge to a shore that, as far as any human being can currently prove, is simply not there. You cannot show them the shore. You can't. You can only tell them with a certainty that would be completely indistinguishable from delusion if you happen to be wrong that it is coming. That when it finally arrives, the entire world is going to need exactly the thing you spent 10 quiet years building in the dark while everyone laughed. And that if you wait until they can actually see the shore for themselves, it will already be far, far too late to have built the bridge. The watch checker passes. Most of them pass. And I want to be fair to them. That is the correct, rational, defensible decision, given what any sane person could actually see standing in that lot on that day. Let me freeze it right there. The empty lot, the checked watch, the founder pointing at nothing, because I want to show you that exact same patch of cracked asphalt, roughly 15 years later, and it is not empty. It is the beating, humming center of the single most valuable company on the entire planet. There are people who got on planes and flew across whole oceans just to stand near it. There is a number attached to the thing you built that is so large that it has genuinely stopped being money and started becoming a kind of geological event. A figure you don't compare to other companies anymore, you compare it to the economies of entire nations. The shore you pointed at, the one that nobody in that room could see, the one you bet your entire life and reputation on, it arrived. And when it arrived, it did not trickle in. It arrived like a tidal wave, and you were the only person on the whole beach who was already standing there, calmly, holding the boat. This whole video is the story of the 15 years that happened in between those two moments. And it is, more than anything, the story of the one thing that absolutely nobody tells you about being right about the future, which is this: being right early is a form of punishment. And to win, you have to be willing to be punished for a very, very long time with no proof at all that the punishment will ever end. So let's go back. Back to before the empty lot. Back to the actual beginning, which is, as it always is, so much dumber and more fragile than the legend that gets told afterward. You did not start with the future. That grand vision came much, much later. You started with a small, specific, almost nerdy little obsession, which was simply that computers were bad at one particular thing, and you thought stubbornly that you could design a chip that was absolutely extraordinary at that one narrow thing. Not everything. One thing. Because while the great giant of the industry, the enormous company that already owned the entire world, was busy making the brain of the computer, the general purpose thinker, the thing that could do anything you asked it to, you made a very different and much stranger decision. You decided to build something that could only do a narrow slice of work, but it could do that slice thousands of times, all at once, simultaneously, in parallel. Imagine a single brilliant genius doing an enormous, complicated calculation all by himself, one step after another, in careful sequence. That was the brain everyone else built. Now imagine a stadium absolutely packed with 100,000 ordinary people, each one doing one tiny, simple piece of arithmetic at the exact same instant. That was your bet, not the genius, the stadium. And it was a genuinely strange bet to make, because the whole world wanted the genius. Everybody wanted the thing that could do anything, and you were over in the corner building a stadium full of simple workers, and in the very beginning, there was precisely one single use on Earth for a stadium full of simple workers, all doing math in parallel at once, and that use was of all the possible things in the world: video games. Because it turns out that drawing the fake, imaginary worlds inside of video games is exactly, perfectly, this kind of problem. Millions of tiny, near-identical calculations, all of them needed at the very same instant, over and over, to paint a convincing picture onto a screen 60 full times every single second. So that is who you sold to. That was your entire market. Teenagers. You laid the very first foundation stones of what would eventually become the most important company on the face of the earth. And your first real paying customers were teenage boys who simply wanted their games to look a little bit cooler. And the company almost died. Repeatedly. And almost immediately. The very first near-death experience was honestly, in retrospect, almost comically fast. You took the entire young, fragile company and you bet all of it on one specific technical way of doing the graphics. One particular architectural approach, and you were wrong. And not a little bit wrong. Not wrong at the margins. You were completely, fundamentally, catastrophically wrong. The whole market simply went a different direction than you'd bet on. Your first big, ambitious chip was designed and built for a world that then did not happen. And you found yourself, terrifyingly early in the story, just weeks away from zero, having placed one enormous, confident, all-in bet on the wrong version of the future. Which, when you think about how this entire story eventually ends, is a bitter and instructive little irony that you will come to appreciate very deeply later on. And you survived it by doing a thing that is 1,000 times easier to say than it is to actually do. You admitted, fast, that you were wrong. You killed the thing you had bet everything on. And you rebuilt the entire company around what the market actually really wanted, at a brutal, punishing speed that very nearly broke both the company itself and every single person inside of it. And in doing that, you learned the first great lesson, and it's a genuinely strange and counterintuitive one for a so-called visionary to have to learn. Being certain about the distant future does not give you the right to be stubborn about the present. You have to learn to hold the far-off shore, the destination, with total, unshakable, almost religious conviction. And at the very same time, you have to hold absolutely everything in between here and there, every single step of the actual path, with a completely open hand, fully and humbly ready to discover that you were dead wrong about all of it. So for years and years after that, you were a good company, grinding away inside a genuinely brutal, deeply unglamorous business. Because making physical chips is nothing at all like making software. When you make software and you get it wrong, you simply go back and you change some of the code. It costs you a weekend. But when you make a chip and you get it wrong, you have already spent 2 entire years and a total fortune fabricating millions of physical, tangible objects that are now, suddenly, nothing more than very expensive sand. Every single product was a 2-year-long bet, placed entirely in the dark, on the question of what gamers were going to want 24 whole months from now, in a merciless market where a single serious misstep meant a competitor was instantly right there to eat you alive. And you lived and died on the outcome of these long, blind bets. And mostly barely, you lived, and you slowly got better at it, and you got bigger, and over the course of a full decade of relentless, unglamorous grinding, you became the company that made the very best chips in the world for the video game people, which is a good business, a real, respectable, profitable business. And here's the thing. It would have been extremely easy and completely reasonable and totally defensible to simply be that, and only that, comfortably, forever. But here is where the entire story turns. And it turns on a single decision that made almost no sense at all at the time and then continued to look for years and years afterward like a slow, quiet, expensive mistake. Because somewhere in the middle of all that grinding, you notice something small. You notice that a tiny handful of strange people, mostly scientists and university researchers, had started quietly buying your gaming chips and then using them for something that had absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with video games. They were doing hard science on them. They had figured out, cleverly on their own, that a chip which had been painstakingly built to paint thousands of pixels all in parallel was also, secretly, underneath. A chip that could do thousands of other completely different kinds of math all in parallel. And so they were essentially hot-wiring your gaming hardware, jury-rigging it, to run their scientific experiments, doing it awkwardly and painfully because, of course, your chips had never once been designed for any of that. It was a tiny signal, a weird, small, easily ignored little group of people using your product for a purpose you had never intended or imagined. And I promise you, 99 out of 100 companies would have completely ignored that signal, or worse, would have gone to those odd customers and told them essentially that they were holding it wrong. You did the exact opposite. You looked at that one tiny, weird, almost invisible signal, and on the strength of it, you made one of the single largest and strangest bets in the entire history of business. You decided to spend genuinely enormous amounts of money, sustained over many years, to build an entire software layer, a whole new programming language and system from scratch, whose one and only purpose in the world was to make it dramatically easier for those scientists to use your chips for things that were not games. You were going to take your successful, profitable gaming company, and you were going to quietly, at truly staggering ongoing costs, transform its chips into general-purpose engines capable of running any kind of massive parallel computation at all, for a market that did not yet exist, for a total customer base that at the time numbered somewhere in the low thousands. And you were going to do this over the loud, repeated, and entirely reasonable objections of very nearly everyone around you, who all kept correctly pointing out that you were taking your hard-won gaming profits and using them to build an elaborate and extremely expensive bridge out to a distant shore that not one single person could actually see. And this, right here, is the part that nobody ever tells you. This bet did not pay off quickly. It did not pay off in 1 year. It did not pay off in 3 years, or in 5. For the better part of an entire decade, this gigantic ongoing investment was, by every single financial measure that anyone could put on a spreadsheet, a pure drag, a cost center, a dead weight, a thing that analysts would ask you over and over to please explain and justify, and that you fundamentally could not explain in any way that would ever actually satisfy them. Because the only truly honest answer you had was this: I believe, with everything in me, that a wave is coming that none of you can see yet, and I am building the boat for it right now, today. And I cannot tell you the exact date that the wave arrives. I can only promise you that when it finally does, there will be absolutely no time left to build the boat. And that, it turns out, is not a sentence that fits neatly into a quarterly earnings call. That is the kind of sentence that slowly earns you a quiet reputation as a man who is clearly very intelligent, but who may sadly be losing his grip on reality. So you spent years and years pouring good money straight into the empty parking lot, standing there telling anyone who would still listen that a great city was coming, right here, on this very spot, and watching them, one after another, politely check their watches. And you have to really understand the very specific and unusual loneliness of that particular experience, because it is the true, hidden cost of being early, and it is the one single thing that absolutely nobody ever warns you about in advance. It is not the risk of being wrong. Everybody already understands the ordinary risk of being wrong. No, it is the much, much stranger and more corrosive agony of being right, but early, which from the inside, in the thick of it, in the actual living of it, is completely and perfectly identical to simply being wrong for years on end. And there is no way, none from inside the middle of it, to ever prove to anyone else or even fully to your own self that you are the first kind of person and not the second kind. You simply have to keep on building the bridge, plank by plank, out toward the invisible shore, funding the whole thing with your gaming money, quietly absorbing the doubt of everyone around you, quarter after quarter after quarter, year after year after year, clinging to a deep private conviction that you cannot back up with even one single piece of present-day evidence. And then, one day the wave came, and it did not come politely. It did not send anyone a warning note ahead of time. One day the thing that you had been so quietly, so patiently building that boat for, this strange idea of teaching machines to actually learn all on their own, by simply feeding them absolute oceans of data, and then letting them find the hidden patterns inside it by themselves. This idea suddenly crossed some invisible threshold, and all at once, violently, shockingly, it worked. And the one exact, specific kind of computation that this breakthrough required, which was thousands upon thousands upon thousands of identical mathematical operations all happening at the very same time, in massive parallel, was the precise, exact thing that your chips had always done. And it was the precise, exact thing that your lonely, doubted, decade-long secret software layer had been quietly, painstakingly built to make possible. And so when the entire world suddenly, desperately spun around all at once looking for someone, anyone, who could actually do this thing, there was exactly one company already standing there on the beach holding the only boat that existed. Yours. The very same company that had spent 10 long years being openly laughed at for stubbornly building a boat out in the middle of dry land. The shore appeared. And it was not some small island. It was an entire continent. It turned out to be, quite possibly, the single most important continent in the entire history of technology. The literal foundation that a whole new age of machine intelligence was now going to be built directly on top of. And every single company on the face of the earth that wanted to go and build anything at all on that new continent, all of them, had no choice but to come directly to you. Because you were the one, the only one who had already spent a lonely, doubted, punishing decade quietly building the only ships in existence that could actually carry them there. The empty parking lot, the cracked asphalt you had once pointed at while a man checked his watch became, essentially overnight, the most valuable single piece of land on the entire planet. After 15 straight years of it very much not being overnight at all. And here is what nobody ever tells you, the thing this entire video is truly, actually about. That overnight success was 15 full years long, and you genuinely have to sit with how that actually feels from the inside. Because the world only ever gets to see the very last part of it. The explosion, the tidal wave, the giant geological nation-sized number. The world sees the man finally standing on the impossibly valuable land, and it immediately calls him a genius who saw the future coming. And there is a real temptation, a strong one, to simply accept that flattering story because it feels good and because it is even, in some narrow sense, partly true. But that story quietly, completely erases the 15 years. It erases the first near death, weeks from zero from betting the whole company on the wrong graphics approach. It erases the entire decade of pouring real money into a use case that flatly did not yet exist. It erases every single earnings call that you could not win, and every smart, respected analyst who privately concluded you had finally lost it, and the specific, grinding, sleepless loneliness of holding tight to a conviction that not one shred of present evidence would support. The genius that everyone stands around celebrating at the very end is completely, totally invisible during the only part of the whole thing that was ever actually hard, which was the middle, which was 15 years long, and which, for almost all of that time, mostly, simply, felt exactly like being wrong. So here is the real lesson. The actual one, buried underneath the fortune. Seeing the future is not the rare part. It just isn't. Plenty of people saw, abstractly, that machine learning might turn out to matter a great deal someday. Plenty of people understood in theory that parallel computing was a genuinely powerful idea. The vision itself was never the scarce resource. Never. The truly scarce resource, the thing that almost no one on Earth actually has, was the willingness to bet the entire company on that vision, and then to survive the gap. To build the bridge all the way out, before the shore was even visible, and then to keep it funded, and keep it fully staffed, and keep believing in it, with your whole chest, through an entire decade of it stubbornly looking like a giant mistake, without a single shred of proof, the whole time, while smart and serious people that you genuinely liked and respected calmly and repeatedly told you to stop. Anybody can see the wave coming on the horizon. Almost literally no one can spend 10 straight years building the boat on dry land while the entire town gathers around a point and laugh, funding that boat the whole time out of a completely separate business, flatly refusing to quit, refusing to sell, and refusing to listen to all the perfectly reasonable people who keep gently begging you to finally be reasonable. That right there is the whole entire thing. The future is not, in the end, won by the people who merely see it coming. It is won, every single time, by the tiny, strange handful of people who see it and who are then also willing to be punished, financially and socially and psychologically and personally, for the long years, and sometimes the entire decade, that sits in the gap between the moment they see it and the much later moment when everybody else finally does too. Being early is fundamentally a bet that you can personally survive being right, before the rest of the world is ready to turn around and agree with you. And most people, very understandably, simply cannot make that bet. And it is not because they lacked the vision. It is because they lacked the appetite for that one specific, sustained, completely unrewarded, and profoundly lonely kind of waiting. So if you truly want to go and build the next one, the real next one, then you have to understand clearly and completely what it is that you are actually signing up for. It is not the parking lot magically becoming the city. That's just the ending. That's the part they put in the movie at the end with the music. No, you are signing up for the years and years of standing there pointing at nothing, for the watch checkers, for the earnings calls you cannot possibly win and the deep conviction you cannot possibly prove, and the 2-year bets placed over and over into total darkness, and the very real, ever-present possibility, the one that you can never, ever fully rule out from the inside, that you are not actually early at all, that you are just simply wrong. You are signing up to fund a long bridge out to a shore that you alone can see, for far longer than anyone around you thinks is remotely sane, running on absolutely nothing but the private, unshakable, and completely unprovable belief that the wave is genuinely coming. And then, if you were right, and if you somehow manage to survive being right, the wave finally comes. And it does not politely reward you in careful proportion to all your patience. No, it arrives all at once, in a rush, as though it had always been completely obvious, as though anyone at all could have plainly seen it coming the whole time. And the world rushes in and hands you a continent and loudly calls you a visionary, and then quietly, completely, forgets that just one single week before that wave finally hit, you were still nothing more than a lonely man standing in an empty parking lot, pointing at nothing, watching someone slowly check his watch. Now go and find your own empty parking lot, and go stand in it, and point. And when they check their watches, and they will, you keep on pointing. Because the whole game, the entire thing, start to finish, is simply whether you can keep pointing at nothing for long enough. Until the day it finally, suddenly, becomes everything.